microphone plugged in here. Go ahead and test the audio. Test. Test. Nice. All right. I think it's working. What's up, Henry? Oh, man. Not going to be making a ton of big swings today. Going to give the body a chance to recover, but just wanted to hop on the live and say hi, hang out for a little bit. What's going on, Henry? Also have the PGA up on our other screen, so that's pretty exciting. Always good to have major championship golf on. We'll check in there as time allows. Oh. Henry said, "Can you sub?" Yeah, I'll take a look. Can't do it on while we're live. But yeah, I'd be thrilled to support other creators on here. Pam said hi. Hey, Pam, what's going on? Welcome to the stream, guys. I like working on these small swings just to start getting loosened up, start feeling some nice solid contact. Something like that. Oh. Anybody playing golf this weekend? Who's got some rounds coming up? Man, it's important to stay hydrated. Oh, sorry for blowing out your speakers. Let's see. LT said, bro, give me like a 1-minute tutorial on a good swing. Well, we can try. Especially if you're just getting started, I think the most important thing is to understand, you know, how you want to deliver the club into impact. Especially with an iron, right? You know, you need the handle leaning forward, some amount of descending strike into the ball. So my best advice, if you truly have 1 minute, is learn how to hit like waist to waist shots at a really high level. And just, you got to perfect that impact position. And everything else around that is kind of window dressing, right? I mean, clearly, if, you know, Jim Furyk and John Rahm can both hit the ball solidly with completely different type swings, right? It's that right there. That's what matters the most. And I would grab like a wedge or an 8-iron, just hit some really short shots. Learn how to hit it solid, right? Impact is so important. And it just doesn't have to be full speed. Other than that, I mean, key fundamentals, outside of impact, right? It's much easier just to deliver the club. That way, if you give yourself some space, right? So keeping that club head away from us as it arcs, right? Instead of, a lot of people, myself included, tend to get the club going this way a little bit to the inside, and then it gets tougher to reroute, right? You come over the top, you get steep, just makes things more challenging. So I really have been focusing on keeping that club head out there. Gives myself all this room to hit it. Henry said hi again. Hey, Henry. Shout out to Henry. Go check out his channel. He's been one of our longtime supporters. Just dropped a new video today, guys. Pretty excited to get your feedback on that one. Hopefully we'll have more of that longer form content coming this summer. Things have just been a little hectic for me, but that's okay. Appreciate you guys still showing the channel a ton of support, a ton of love, which has been awesome. Shout out to LT, asking a good question. Hopefully that was helpful. Having myself a athletic, non-alcoholic beer here. End my week. All right, let's do some body work. So for these, so I have a 5-iron in my hand. And what I'm really trying to feel here is kind of like position by position. How do I want my body to work through the swing and go at about 10% speed? For me, lately, it's really been exaggerating this, keeping the club head outside, right? I still sometimes get it going like that. It just makes it so much easier for me to keep everything stable, deliver a, just a clean strike on the back of the ball. So I like a lot of these reps, especially when you're working on technique, right? Makes it so much easier to ingrain something when you're not trying to do it at full speed. So that's one of my best tips is when you're working on swing changes, or you're working on your positions, you know, if you're at the range, make like 3 swings per ball, right? So you get 2 slow, kind of exaggerated ones, right? Where you really are working on, you know, those feels, right? Whatever they are for you. So you're maximizing kind of the motor repetitions, you know, for every swing. And then not every swing has to be full speed either. Especially if you've been struggling or, you know, really trying to fight a big slice or a hook, whatever it may be, just slowing it down, you know, hitting some well-struck shots that go, you know, straight or more in the direction that you're working on, you know, mentally can also be pretty valuable. You'll notice how much lighter the club feels when you do it that way too, right? Much better supported. As opposed to this, it starts to feel heavy. All right, let's check the chat here really quick. Hope everybody's had a good Friday. Head into the weekend. Hey, Maxton said, what's up? What's up, Maxton? C. Rich, do you play in tournaments? Yeah, sometimes. Kingsley said hi. Hey, Kingsley. Kraken said hi. Do you know how to fix casting? Because that's my main problem. I do have a good drill for that we can take a look at. So when you're casting, right, what does that mean? You know, where you're getting to the top and you're really losing this angle here, right? So we want to maintain, you know, some amount of this wrist angle right into the ball in order to make sure that when we impact, right, this handle, the shaft is leaning forward some. Not excessively, but some amount. And if you're casting, right, that means you're losing this angle, right, and throwing the club head, you know, too early, right, releasing it too early. Generally, if you're a right-handed player, that's because you're giving it too much right hand, right? If you push on the handle from the top, club head's going to go this way, right, and you lose the angle early. So now if we understand why that's happening, right, we're pushing on the handle too much from the top, well, what should we do instead, right? Especially with the right hand, you want to feel like it's pretty passive until maybe about, you know, shaft parallel, right? And then from there, you can give it some right hand to deliver speed at the bottom, right? But not from the top. And the drill that I'm going to ask you to do that I think will help is to make some left, you know, some lead arm only swings, right? You can do this with your feet together and take a step. That can help, right? Trying to feel like this hand in the swing is much more passive. And trying to understand, you know, what is causing that, right? And then how to deliver most of the speed and you know, energy of the club with your left side, right? That's where most of the speed and power is coming from. It's from your left, you know, foot and ankle pushing off the ground, right, to really deliver speed. And if you learn to make some quality swings, you can even hit shots, you know, maybe grab like a pitching wedge or an 8-iron. This is a 5-iron, so maybe not perfect, but, you know, make some little swings with just your lead arm. And feel how that, you know, kind of forces your body to sequence a little better, right? Because if you're swinging with just your left arm, it gets really hard. It wouldn't make sense to cast it, right? You'd get to here and then you'd be like, well, I'm not going to deliver any speed like that, right? So learning how to keep some better structure, you know, in your wrist angles throughout the swing with that drill, I think could be really helpful. It's Aiden said, how do I get more distance off my swings? Brant said, great work. I love the help. Thanks, Brant. So more distance, right, is largely just going to be about club head speed. So, you can do that with mobility work. You can just practice swinging faster a bunch. But I would ask you to keep in mind that speed and technique are different things, right? So when I'm out here practicing speed, or I'm on the range with, trying to work on driver club head speed, I don't really care so much where the ball's going, right? My objective is to have every swing be a tiny bit faster than the one before. And I measure that with a launch monitor. So I have some data to tell myself, like, okay, today's fastest swing was 115. And, in a day or two, I'd love to get that to 116. And some days I will, some days I won't. So, you can lift weights in the gym. That can help a lot. But outside of that, the training club head speed or fitness stuff or mobility, if you're talking about driver, then the only other option really is to improve your launch conditions. So you could launch the ball higher with less spin, and you could hit the ball further with the same club head speed. So those are my thoughts on the distance question. Selly Boy said, I need help. Iron 7, how far is it? You asking me? My 7-iron on the golf course, I usually play like 180 yards. On the simulator, it goes further than that. But I don't like swinging, at 105% out on the golf course. Take thumb and index finger off the club with trail arm is a great drill. Yeah, that is a great drill, right? Or also, if you're struggling with casting, even the advanced version of that, right, is to, kind of make a flat palm here. Take your normal left-hand grip, right? I've seen Ludwig do this drill. And you're supporting the club still here, right? But without any of your fingers closing around it. And you can hit shots that way. And if you can learn how to hit it solid with that drill, that's hard. You feel like the club head's out of control, so it really forces you to use your body to add speed and to time it up. But it feels really good when you do it right, I'll tell you that. So that's another good one. In the chat, how to be more consistent in my shots, Maxon asked. It's a good question, right? That's part of why golf is so exciting, right? If you give an average golfer 100 golf balls on the range, they're going to hit a few that are really nice, like, high and straight. It's just, trying to dial that in and deliver that strike more consistently. So forgive me if you've heard this before, but for Max, and to answer your question, I think, again, I just go back to, breaking the swing into smaller pieces and saying, like, okay, can I deliver a quality strike at 50% speed somewhat consistently, right? And you want to get to where you can, make that small swing and hit it right out of the center of the club face with nice flight, 10 out of 10 times, or 10 times in a row, however you want to challenge yourself. And once you can, perform at that level, right, where you're really, at a slow speed, saying, like, okay, I'm really, I'm hitting it where I want to, I'm compressing the ball some, then you just make the swing a little bigger, right? And you try to, achieve the same level of performance, with a more difficult task, right? A bigger swing. And that's how you build your consistency just over time, right? With reps and reps and reps. So hopefully that helps, Maxon. Will Dode Meme says, why do I always hit to the left? Are you right-handed, Will? Let me make sure I understand. So if you're hitting it to the left as a right-handed golfer, that's different than if you're lefty. But let's assume you're a right-handed player and your ball is going too far to the left. Well, that means our club face at impact is closed, right? And if it's starting to the left, that means that the path might also be somewhat to the left, right, across. So to mitigate that, right, we need to get the club face some amount more open and that path more neutral, more down our target line. And the drill that I would have you do right away to say, like, okay, I don't want to hit it left, is just train yourself when you're out there practicing to say, okay, I know my normal swing, right? I aim, kind of right down my target line, down to center field, is going to produce a shot that goes somewhat, more than I want to the left, right? So from the same setup or, position, hit some balls way, way to the right, almost down the right field line, if you will, right? Let's use a baseball analogy. And just feel how different that will feel, right? To force yourself to hit it over there. And you'll notice, you can't close the club face quite so much. Your path will shift. Use your brain to tell your body what to do. And then you're just trying to build that skill of, okay, I feel what the club face is like over here to make it go left with my normal swing versus now I'm teaching myself to, keep it open a little more, hit some shots that curve the other direction, right? And you're just building that skill set. How to stop slicing a driver? That's a good one. We can do some slice questions. See a bunch of those. Daily Video says I have the exact same TaylorMade bag. Yeah, cool. This is a really old one, the R9 TP bag. I've had that for a long time. What's my handicap? Usually between 0 and +1. I think it's up to like 1 right now, actually. I posted a couple of bad scores. How do you know what angle you should be swinging at for irons compared to driver? Super new to golf, sorry. Don't be sorry. That's a good question. So let's do the slice question first. And it's going to be somewhat similar to Will's question about the hook, right? If you know that you're slicing it, especially with driver, the understanding why that happens, right, means that we are, delivering into the ball a strike that is some amount of the face open and the path that's across to the left, right, if I'm a right-handed player. So that's the, if you could think about a table tennis or tennis, if you wanted to hit a really spinny lob shot, right, a short one right over the net, you'd open the face of your racket or paddle and really kind of cut down and across it, right? And you'd add a bunch of spin, the ball wouldn't go very far, it would, hit to the right when it lands, right? That's exactly what's happening with the face of our driver when we're slicing it, right? We're coming kind of steep and across it, and that's producing that left to right, spinny flight. So if we want to achieve the opposite, right, which would mean the face is somewhat more closed at impact, the path is more to the right relative to before, more neutral, and we would, have some amount of ascending angle into the ball, ideally. So the exact opposite, again, to use my table tennis analogy, if you wanted to hit like a really hard forehand, right, like a 10 out of 10 speed shot, right, you kind of start low and you come up on it and add some top spin, right? In golf, we don't, there is no top spin, right? But that low to high finish, right, will produce a lot less backspin. And that's what we're really looking for. So if we understand now that those are the conditions we're producing, well, how do we fix it, right? So grab your driver. Next time you're on the range, like I was just saying for Will, just the opposite, right? If I know that my normal swing, when I stand here and I try to hit it straight, it's going to hit a big slice. Well, I have to teach myself to control the club face and the club path in a different way to produce a different shot. So start hitting some hooks, right? Aim right down to center field, and then make sure you hit some down the left field line. It's okay to hit a big draw, right? A lot of right to left on it, because you're just trying to teach yourself, okay, this is how I manipulate the club face. This is how I, change the path to alter, the flight of the ball. And you're trying to build the skill set, right? Not just have a drill to learn how to hit it straight. Because there's plenty of those. There's plenty of good drills. Say like, oh, I sliced, I don't want to slice anymore. I think it's important to understand, how do I actually produce that? How do I, build a skill set around delivering the club and the club face in a certain way and seeing what that does to the ball flight. So that's my thoughts on the slice. Hopefully that helps. Drills for sand. When I use a wedge, I only blade. Why? Well, I think if you're blading it mostly, especially with the wedges, that means that you're, not delivering as much shaft lean into the ball as we could, right? So if this is your golf ball and it's sitting on the ground, and you're blading it, right, that means that the bottom of the club, right, these bottom grooves, that's where you're hitting the ball, right? And you can see, to do that, you know, this is a lofted wedge, but, you know, the shaft is pretty neutral here, even leaning back, right, if my target is this way. So to correct that, right, we need to have more descending angle into the strike, right? And we need the shaft leaning more forward because we need to expose that club face to the ball, right? You can't hit it on the, you know, the sweet spot that's in, you know, these kind of third, fourth, fifth grooves without leaning the shaft forward some. So that's my advice on that. Selly boy, unfortunately, the sand is going to be tough, but my best tip is understanding that sand shots are fundamentally different, right? In that you're not actually hitting the ball. Your club is going into the sand and underneath the ball, and the sand is what propels your ball up. So, you know, once you understand that you don't have to use the club to, like you would off of a hard lie, to scoop it up or to, you know, hit into the ball first. I think that can really be a light bulb moment for a lot of people to say, like, oh, I'm actually just trying to move the sand underneath the ball and get it to pop up onto the green. I mean, then it's just about reps, right? I mean, there's only so much technique. You know, you open the face a little, you open your stance. Robert says... Oh, sorry, Robert. Yeah, why am I hitting irons and hybrids straight, but driver usually slices? Yeah, so again, like I was just explaining with the slice question, it's... I imagine that when you have even, you know, as a lofted club like a hybrid, if your swing is a little bit steep, you can get away with it, right? But the driver's going to magnify or exacerbate all of our swing faults, right? It has the least amount of loft. It's, you know, going to produce the least amount of spins, right? So those offline shots are magnified. So that's my best guess, is that, you know, even when you swing a wood, right, you can hit down on it some amount and still produce pretty straight shots. But we got to understand that the driver is different and that we want to be hitting more up on it. So, you know, a good feel for that, Robert, can be, you know, like really like low to high, right? So imagine instead of swinging, you know, from high to low like you might with an iron, right? Like your swing kind of starts low and gets up high, like, you know, you're trying to really launch it into the air. Because that added spin is, you know, with the face open is what's causing it to slice. Brand new golfers in here. Look up stack and tilt swings, what I'm learning. If this guy doesn't mind, I'll share name of a YouTuber I learned from. I think stack and tilt is totally fine. It's a fine way to learn, you know, a pretty consistent swing. And I've never claimed to be a swing guru. I just, you know, have mostly taught myself to play decent golf, and I love, you know, learning about the golf swing and trying to share some of that with you guys. So, speed and distance, I hear you, Robert, but I also think we know that statistically it does matter a lot, right? Like, it's directly correlated to your handicap potential, how far you can hit the ball. But both can be true. My old school blades are less lofted than modern ones. Yeah, that's probably true. I have some old blades that I still like to practice with, right? This is an old 2011 MB. I still have these blades in a box somewhere that I would reshaft in a heartbeat if I needed to. So I like practicing with this guy once in a while. But yeah, it is important to understand, guys, when you're like, well, Bryson hit a 6-iron 235 yards. And, well, that 6-iron might not be the same loft as yours or somebody else's. Touch back on the angle question, please. Oh, great. Thank you for reminding me. So, like I was just saying, with the irons, right, we need to be hitting down on it some amount, right? So the angle into the ball is going to be, you know, if you think of it negatively, right, a negative angle of attack, right? So with the irons, that's going to be, you know, you want to deliver the shaft leaning forward some amount, right? I'm exaggerating it here. And descending, right? Whereas with the driver, the opposite, right? Because it's sitting up off the ground on a tee, we want to hit up on it, right? As much as we can. So that's the difference in the angle between the irons and the driver. So hopefully that helps. Philippe said hi. Hey, Philippe. Hey, Neil. Like Bryson, is it smart to use jumbo grips on irons? I think grips are a personal preference, but I will share that I have switched for the first time ever to a larger grip. You know, these are a built-up mid-size grip, whereas I had used, you know, like this is a standard grip on my old clubs. And I think I am going to even go to jumbos next year. I do think there's something to it, just, you know, in terms of taking, for me, the hands and the flippiness out of the swing a bit. And forcing myself to really use the rotation of my body and my chest to square the club face. So I think there's something to it, yeah. But again, personal preference is really going to be... Oops, sorry. Thanks for reminding me about the camera there. Hopefully that's better. Let's see. Yeah, we're still getting all this stuff worked out. And it does tend to wander also as I move things around. Sorry about that. How do you properly square face woods? So if you're talking about, you know, squaring the face, right? I'm a proponent of not, you know, I don't like to have the club face rotating too much relative to the path throughout the swing. So where I would tell you to start if you're struggling to square the face is make sure that you're, you know, setting up to it square, you know, not with the face open or shut. And, you know, then get on video, make some videos and try to get a sense of, you know, when I do impact the ball, is that face still open, right? Pointing to the right, is it closed? Pointing this way. And, you know, having a solid, you know, foundationally, or, you know, fundamentally sound grip will help with that. Right, to make sure that when you know, deliver the club, that face is nice and square. But it's also just, you know, at some level it's about reps. You know, practice delivering the club face back to square just over and over again. How far can you hit your driver? Well, I think I can hit it, you know, 400 yards if there was a ton of wind and downhill. But no, on TrackMan these days, my top ball speed this year is 172. So that's like a, you know, 290 carry, kind of in that range. On the golf course, I would guess, you know, my ball speed's more like 165. So maybe going like 275 in the air. Should you aim to always shallow clubs like drivers and woods, an iron only thing? No, I think, you know, delivering a shallow strike into the ball is always a good idea. You know, I've worked really hard at shallowing out my swing. It used to be very kind of inside and steepening, right? And then making a bunch of adjustments, you know, leaning back or otherwise to still get to the ball. But I think just because of, you know, the geometry or the physics of a golf club, right? You know, this part is much heavier than this part. You know, if you allow the energy to appropriately transfer, right? And that's, you know, that's why all these smooth swings we love, Fred Couples and otherwise, you know, it's just that change of transition is so smooth, right? Because you're trying to deliver as much energy back into the club head and into the ball as we can. So I think if you do that, right, you know, gravity is going to naturally pull that club head down and shallow it out. So I think of shallowing almost as like not an intentional thing, but the result of, you know, like a fluid, well-balanced swing, right? Like when I send the club up, I give it some energy from the bottom. Imagine like a pirate ship ride at an amusement park, right? You know, it goes up and then it kind of hangs at the top for a minute and it comes back down kind of fast and it hangs at the other side for a minute and it comes back down. That's what we want our swing to be like, right? You don't need to put all the energy into it at the top, right? You know, it's going to be herky and not get you very far. But if you send it up and you let it, you know, collect the energy and then whoosh, right at the bottom, that's more what we're looking for, because we want that speed we don't care how fast the club's moving back here. We want it delivering maximum speed into the golf ball, right? So sorry, it's gotten a little bit long-winded, but you know, the shallowing is really just a result of, you know, properly sequencing and allowing the energy in the club to transfer. Okay, Joshua, how do I stop chunking my irons? They're a little big on me. I'm still getting used to it. So yeah, same drill, same advice that I've been giving, especially for contact, right? You know, that's if you're hitting it thin, if you're hitting it off the toe, if you're hitting it, you know, hitting it fat and chunking it, make the swing smaller, right? Teach yourself to deliver a clean strike, you know, with a very short swing. Boom, right? And you do that, you know, 20, 30, 50 times. And then you say, okay, I really feel like I can confidently, you know, deliver a quality strike on the ball with my short swing. Well, I'm going to make the swing a little bigger, a little more challenging, right? And same thing, it's going to, you know, it's going to get tougher. You're going to have to spend a little more time. But you're trying to deliver that consistent strike over and over and over again, right? Because on the golf course, we don't get 100 tries. You only get one. So you want to make sure that you can, as consistently as possible, replicate those impact conditions. Hopefully that helps, Josh. How can I use an iron better? I'm great with a 7. So yeah, I think, again, you know, just trying to work on those fundamental things like impact should translate to all your clubs. But if you know, if you're okay with a 7, but maybe like a 4 or 5 iron is more challenging, you know, again, just work on kind of a nice, smooth, short swing. And just work on that over and over again. Eric said, I need to stop. Your drill worked and my swing is better. Wow, that's great. Awesome. I love the idea of like real time. You know, you guys are out there with your clubs. Like, hey, let's, you know, work on this stuff together. And if you guys are enjoying the stream, you want to hit subscribe, like the stream, that'd be amazing. I'm super grateful for all the support. We're racing past 1,100 subscribers already, which is very cool. Can you try hitting the golf ball like a baseball player? I'm not sure I know what you mean, Dominoes, but come back to me and tell me. How do I keep my arms straight? A drill. Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the drills that I like, right, is getting your left arm across, right, and then you hook your right arm underneath, right, and that's teaching, you know, and then you keep that kind of all together, right. You're training your body to feel more connected. This is the same idea if you've ever seen somebody put the towel under their arms like this, right? And this is a way to feel like your arms and your chest stay connected. And this pressure, you know, upwards from your right arm can train you to have that feeling of like, okay, this is what it feels like to keep my arm straight. If I bend it, right, I lose the towel, you know, I lose all the structure and connection, right? So that can be a great drill to train yourself to, you know, keep the arms and chest connected in that way. So hopefully that helps. That's a drill I like a lot, especially, you know, if you don't have a club, you don't have a hitting net. Like I'm brand new to this. I've done tons of hours of practice, you know, just like this with using my phone as a camera and just going slow, going through positions, right? Seeing how it looks on camera and then adjusting from there. So hopefully that's helpful. Exercises for more speed and yardage. Good question. So I love keeping these bands in my golf bag. These are just, you know, inexpensive, you know, PT bands. These are great for warming up, right? But you can do, you know, tons of great exercises with these. You know, stuff, you know, for your lats, for your hamstrings. I'm a big fan of kettlebells too. I have a couple of those I just keep around, and you know, for club head speed and mobility stuff, you know, I try to do a lot of lower body work, you know, deadlifts and lunges, split squats, things like that, right? You know, trying to maintain the you know, resiliency and flexibility in the key joints for the golf swing, right? You know, your knees and hips. You know, so, you know, figuring out a stretching routine is super helpful. I really love there's a John Rahm TPI video on YouTube that you should check out, where he kind of goes through his pre-golf warm-up and trying to understand which muscles we need to warm up and activate. And I think mobility is just as important as strength, right? Flexibility can get you pretty far in golf. So training some amount of your, non-swing practice, right? Call it mobility or gym time, to flexibility, especially in the hips and ankles, is super important. Trying to make sure that when we are, rotating and trying to create this separation in our upper and lower body, that, our joints can give us the range of motion that we need. That held me back for a really long time, guys. My ankle didn't really want to bend. My hip was kind of locked up, so I'd end up just doing this kind of, slide move into the ball and get all kinds of early extension. It wasn't until I really worked on, increasing a lot of this range of motion that I was able to make a bunch of breakthroughs in my swing. So I think that stuff's super important. I'm glad you asked about it. I struggle with too much compression and low shots. That can be frustrating for sure. Mike, I would say, again, just, in the vein of fighting fire with fire, try and get out there and be like, well, I want to hit the highest shot with this club I've ever hit. And then, hit the next 3 higher than that one. Because if you're really delivering too much, shaft lean, you won't be able to hit the ball higher. So giving yourself a task orientation, right? Because it's going to be really tough to feel at high speed. And I'm not a big fan of downswing swing thoughts anyway. Be like, oh, just, lean the shaft less at impact, right? You need to give yourself a task to say, I got to hit it higher and then, see windows and then hit it even higher than that. Should I hit more down on it, or would that make it more chunky? Well, Joshua, if you're hitting it heavy, right, that means that the club is, interacting with the ground before the ball, right? And what I'm not sure it's about, angle of attack so much as it is, where your weight is, right? If you're hitting it heavy, you might be leaning back, really trying to help it up into the air, right? But you could imagine, so if that's the swing that you're making, right, is interacting with the ground before the ball, right? Well, how could I move it forward in front of the ball? Well, I'd have to shift my weight more to the left, right? If I hang back, I'm going to hit the ground. So I make the backswing, and then I move, I'm actually shifting towards the target some before I rotate in order to move that low point in front of the ball. That's what a divot is, right? You hit the ball and then the ground. Excuse me. So, some amount more weight shift to the left could be really helpful, in trying to not hit it so chunky. How do I get it in the air? Good question. If you're just trying to, get the ball, you're just starting out and you're, struggling to get the ball up in the air, you can use a tee, right? It's a great way to start to build your confidence. Grab a short club, like a pitching wedge, maybe a 9-iron, right? And then you can, I'm not sure I have one that's small enough for here, but we can try. Well, it's going to be a bit silly, but, pop that ball on a tee and then just make some small swings, right? And just really practice, getting it up in the air, hitting a nice, shot down the range. It doesn't have to be a big swing, right? You don't have to be swinging like this and then trying to hit it, Just grab a short club and make some chippy swings off a tee, and that should really help, start to train that feeling of, hitting the ball properly and give you some confidence, right? It's not fun when you're just learning and you're like, man, I can't even get the ball off the ground. So you don't be afraid to use a tee, even with an iron, especially if you're just starting out. Des Mode 803 said, how about 5-wood? How about 5-wood? I'm a big 5-wood guy. You want to see mine? It's a little old, She's got a little bit of miles on her, but she's pretty. I love the purple shaft. I still have these in my driver. 3-wood, 5-wood. Even more cool, though. This is the new one, guys. 7-wood. 7-wood gang is here. And I really love the feel of this dark wave shaft. This is the 70 gram X Flex from Mitsubishi. So yeah, I've really been loving the 7 wood. My miss is thin. Even when I make good contact, I don't make a divot. What should I do to help with this? Good question, Derek. So if you're looking to, have more of a divot or your swing needs a little bit more descending angle, make sure you're really getting your weight shift right towards the ball. Oops. Because if we know our swing happens on an arc, and so to hit down on it, we need to shift laterally towards the target and lower, right? Because we can't start that way. We start neutral on the ground. So really make sure that if you're wanting to, and you can practice when you're on the range, right? Be like, my only objective for this swing is to take a divot, and make it that, make it smaller, and make it say that's my only objective, right? Is just to, boom, really, compress it, swing down into the turf. But don't overdo that feel, right? If you're making good contact, no one says you have to take a divot. We mostly care about where the ball ends up after we hit it. Golfer guy, what's up, dude? What's up, golfer guy? I'm kind of confused on shot shaping. I know how to, but it's too complicated for me. Good question. So when we're shaping shots, and I'll caveat, there are times when you need to hit certain shapes, right? Hit a draw around a dog leg, or but in terms of approach shot strategy, I don't think it's a good idea to say, well, the pin's on the right, so I have to hit a fade, to really try and attack that pin, right? Or vice versa, hitting a draw to a left pin. I think you're going to be much better off in the long run learning to hit a pretty straight, consistent ball flight, right? For me, that's mostly fades these days. But it does depend on the day. I try to hit a lot of shots, straight. Some days the club face just wants to be a little more closed and the ball starts turning over, and that's fine. But I mostly am just, hitting the shot that I have that day and trying to hit it on the green, right? Caring a lot less about where the flag is. But that wasn't your question, right? Your question is how do we train shot shaping? And again, my best advice would be to exaggerate it first. And then, once you've built the skill set, then you can, dial it in and try and, kind of reduce the variance, right? So, for draws, well, you'd aim way out to the right, swing back to the left, really train yourself to hit some big draws, and vice versa, right? What does it feel like to do the opposite? Where I aim left, maybe I get a little closer to it, weight stays more forward, steeper swing, right? And hit some big fades. And compare those two feelings, right? And build those skills to say, okay, on demand, right? It might not be perfectly at my target, but I can at least produce a draw or a fade, or a hook or a slice. And it's then it's just about dialing it in and degrees of change. So hopefully that helps. That's my best advice on the shot shaping. Let the golf ball be your teacher. Hey, Jung Jae, welcome to the stream. Jonah says, do the golf shoes with spikes really help? They really do. They definitely do. These shoes I'm wearing now don't have any spikes, and you can certainly tell the difference, right? And why does it matter? Because we're trying to, to generate speed, you have to push off the ground, right? If I had a heavy a sandbag or a kettlebell here, right, and I had to, try and throw it that way as far as I could, right, I would swing it back and then swing it forward, right? But with that downswing is I'm leaning into the ground and I'm pushing away. It's the same thing in the golf swing. And when you're out there on, wet grass, on down slopes and stuff, not only the traction can be beneficial, but in terms of generating speed, right, we have to push this way, right? The body goes away so the club can go out that way. So that was a long-winded way of saying, yes, I think the shoes definitely can help. I'm 17. I keep slicing and hooking at the All-Stars driving range. Nice. I'm getting 3 new wedges, not sure what degrees I should get. Well, I think if you're getting new wedges and you're saying, I don't want to get fit, right? Have a good sense of like, what are the yardage gaps that you currently have? How far do your current clubs go? And what are you trying to solve for, right? And most players, depending on how many wedges you want to carry, do that in either 4 or 6 degree increments, right? So my wedges are 52, 56, and 60 degrees. And as you might imagine, they have pretty consistent, yardage gaps, right, because of that. And then my pitching wedge is 47 degrees. So 47, 52, 56, 60, right? And that covers me everything from 145 down to 100 yards with a full swing. So understand, which yardages you're trying to solve for. And then, if that's different than what you currently have, understand, what might change. Or, whether you're adding a wedge. You could certainly try, like a 54, 50, or 50, 54, 58 combo is pretty common too. At some level it comes down to preference and, trying to match the lofts of your current clubs, right? If you have a 43 degree pitching wedge, you might need a different gap wedge than I have because my pitching wedge is 47. Can you explain a shank and the different ways it occurs? I really don't want to, Frank, but I will for you guys. So what is a shank? You hear somebody say that? I say it sometimes when I just hit a poor shot, which I shouldn't because, thinning it is not the same as shanking it. Right? This is the hosel, the part where the club face attaches to the rest of the club, right? And if you hit the ball off of there, we call it a shank. The ball is going to go, usually somewhere to the right, all kinds of crazy directions. Yeah, you said it, Frank. We're going to say it all now. We're going to say shank, 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 shank. I might even hit one as much as I don't want to for you guys. See if I can do it. So sometimes, often due to mental issues, right? Not even your swing necessarily. You can hit the ball off the hosel. Why does it happen, right? Especially if your strike pattern is close to the heel. Well, it just means you made a swing that was incrementally more towards the heel, and what's over on the heel? The hosel. You know what, Frank? I can't even do it. I can't bring myself to intentionally try to hit one. So I'm not going to. But you could imagine, right, if you were hitting it off the heel and... Oh, there you go. See, I had to do it on accident. Couldn't do it on purpose. So yeah, that's what it looks like when you hit the hosel. You guys can all thank Frank Boston for ruining your dreams and hopes tonight. Let me catch up here on the chat. How do I fix going up on my toes through impact? I'm getting a very high apex. Good question. So I used to struggle with this too, right? And if you're moving up and into the ball, right, your weight's gonna, get up on your toes. You just end up kind of looking like this through impact, right? I think it's helpful to understand, well, at a slow speed, what would the opposite of that feel like, right? And for me, it's, starting with my weight more balanced, right? 50-50 this, laterally, right? And then knowing that, this weight is actually going to go backwards, right, into my left heel as I get into impact, and this left heel is landing some amount closer to the target, right? And that should help, with trying to stay off the toes. You can also, when you're hitting balls, you could put a golf ball under your toes to practice, right? You can make some swings like this. You'll notice it makes it a lot more difficult to early extend, right? Because then I'm up on the toe. I've seen some drills where I once in a while where, you could lift both your toes up and make the whole swing that way, right? So my toes now, I'm pushing them up into the top of the shoe, right? So my weight's all on my heels. This is just for practice. But I make the whole swing, keeping, those toes in the top of the shoe. And you'll notice, it makes it really hard to extend, you know, if your toes are not touching the ground, you're not going to get up on them. So hopefully that helps. Broela. How can I produce more lift on my 9-iron? I too often hit it as a straight laser. So if you're hitting it, you know, a little thin, right? That's what you're describing, I think. We need a little more shaft angle into impact and a little more descending blow, right? Because this club is sitting on, you know, sometimes flat piece of ground. So in order to not, you know, if you're hitting it with the bottom part of the club like this, that's going to come out with that low flight, right? So we need to practice delivering it, you know, a little bit more, use the loft of the club to shoot the ball up in the air. Frank says, I'm a club pro here in Tulsa, was curious how that would work out. Yeah. Thanks, Frank. I'm gonna be trying not to make that swing all weekend now. Is there a way to golf with lower back issues and not mess myself up? Oh, good question, Juan. I have done this myself for years, and only in the last few years have I really kind of solved my back issues. You know, everybody's body is different, but mine was mostly about, you know, my hips being frozen and immobile from a lot of sitting and trying to really, you know, having to work, you know, to open up my hip flexors, you know, to stop asking my lower back to do things like hold me up, you know, that's not really meant to, you know, and training your glutes and hamstrings. So setting that part aside, yeah, I think there are definitely things you can do to protect your lower back, you know, because golf does ask a lot of our spine. You know, for me, the key things are I always warm up, right? I always stretch. You know, I was just showing I have these bands. You know, I have a whole, you know, routine, right? I get on the ground. I do, you know, trying to create some space in my back. You know, you can do some exercises like this to really try and, you know, open things up, right? So I never hit balls without, you know, warming up and making sure that I'm not going to injure myself. So it is definitely possible. I might suggest, you know, you could tailor your swing to maybe a little bit less rotation and being shorter if your back is an issue, right? Because the more, you know, the more you turn and rotate, the more you're going to ask of that lower back area. But it's definitely possible one. I don't want you to say, like, oh, I have a bad back, so there's no way I could ever play golf. I've been there myself. It's, you know, it's definitely something that can get better, and you can play golf, you know, with some appropriate precautions. Do you know how to hit wedges farther? Sure, but Kraken, I would tell you my initial reaction is I don't think we want to hit our wedges further, relatively speaking, right? Wedges are about accuracy, you know, and consistent distance. Jim and Dana said, going golf with my dad tomorrow. First time this year. That's awesome. SoCal Good said hi. Stretch is recommended. Welcome, SoCal. SM Bernard, could you slow-mo when and how you release the club for a beginner? Yeah, good question. So when we talk about releasing the club, right, if you played, you know, baseball or other sports, right, there is a moment where, you know, you do let go of that club head, right, to send it, you know, into the ball with speed. And in golf, it actually happens much later. You know, this is, again, something I've been working on for a long time. You know, I used to get up here and say, oh, it's time to hit the ball, release the club from the top, right? And then you have to make all kinds of adjustments. And for me, I now try to feel like I'm releasing it like at about my hip, right? So my whole backswing, right? I'm just giving myself room and space, and then I'm starting down, I'm shifting my weight, and then I get to about here, and then it's like, okay, time to hit. Boom. But you're trying to maintain, you know, those angles and that speed and energy as late in the swing as you can, such that, you know, you don't want to be swinging the club head super fast back here. You want to be swinging it fast right as you hit the ball, right? So, again, in slow motion, it's a lot later of a hit, you know, just given the length of the swing as it arcs around us. So it's all the way up here, and then it's, you know, I'm falling, I'm shifting my weight, and then at here, boom. And that for me, too, again, you know, my miss used to be getting kind of flippy and a lot of right hand. And that feel has helped me a lot to take a lot of that, you know, throw at the bottom out.
How does your driver swing vary from your irons? I'm slicing it sometimes. I struggle with this too, I'll share. The transition from the iron swing to the driver swing. And the things that are, really effective in an iron swing, right? A descending blow, hitting down on it, are the opposite of what we want for a driver, right? So, finding some checkpoints or ways to remind yourself, like, wait, hold on, I don't need my iron swing. I don't need to be, kind of getting down on top of it with the driver. I'm trying to hit it, high and far with not a lot of spin. And I struggle with it myself too. And then you're like, man, I really just was on top of that one and held it out to the right. And, when you exacerbate that, you can hit some big slices, right? So for me, it's about mentally trying to remember, like, okay, this is a different swing. This is a different club. The objective is different. Some elements of the swing will be the same. But that's where I would start. Hello from Korea. Welcome. Very cool. Thanks for checking out the stream all the way from Korea. Want to fix my reverse pivot. How can I fix my reverse pivot? So when you say reverse pivot, what is it? Let me just explain for everybody what that means, right? So normally, right, if we're trying to coil and get the energy into the club with our body, right? We have some amount of turning, right, this way. The reverse pivot is the opposite, right? So the weight stays forward and the upper body goes this way, right? And then everything kind of, it has, think of cause and effect, right? So if I'm forward like this, when I downswing, I'm leaning back, right? This is not a good position to be trying to hit from, right? Back here. So if you're reverse pivoting, well, we need to fix that part first. And how would, instead of feeling like, this upper body goes forward, feel more around, right? You want to feel like your spine angle. And if I hold a club like this, right? If this is my spine angle, and I'm trying to rotate around it, right? If I lean forward, I'm going to lose the connection, right? It's going to, I'm not going to be able to hold it on my spine angle, right? So this is my posture. That's, this can be a good way to feel like, okay, I need to get, more of my weight into my right hip and, not having so much of that tilt towards the target. So that's where I would start in the reverse pivot. How do I keep my head on the ball? Good question, Owen. So head on the ball, I assume you mean, you're maybe coming, out of your posture some or, not making good contact. I would, again, slow it down and really feel like if I make it everything super stable, I can deliver a nice strike on the ball. But working on it at full speed isn't going to get you very far, right? And what you want to feel is just like, this is very stable. Imagine someone was holding a string on the top of your hat, right? And it wasn't able to move throughout the whole swing. Of course, that's a feel versus real thing. Your head actually does move down and then back up, as you transition and shift your weight. But you can make a lot of progress feeling like there's more stability there, and just going really slow. Ooh, it's getting warm in here. If you guys are enjoying the stream, you want to subscribe and get the notifications for when we do this again, that'd be awesome. We've got a new long form video that just dropped today, and as always, there'll be a short or 2 or 3 every day as we continue trying to play better golf and improve my game and also bring you guys along and share some tips and stuff. So I truly have been blown away by the amount of support on the channel. And I feel very grateful, right? I'm excited for, the next milestone, right? 2,000, 10,000, 20,000 subs. But, again, it's one day at a time. And, every time I open up my phone and I see, like, hey, somebody else decided to subscribe, just like, wow, that is, that is the best vote of confidence somebody's out there saying like, hey, I saw I did something cool and I want to see more of that. So it's been, really validating to have the support and see the growth. So thank you guys. Our friend from Korea said hi, or said thank you so much. Yeah, you're welcome. Flux said, how do I get my arms higher without topping the ball? When you say arms higher, do you mean like in the backswing? Tell me more, Flux. What's your question? Are you saying your arms are a bit flat now and you'd rather them be up here? Mr. LB says, I want to start playing golf but don't have loads of money. Do you have some more affordable options for clubs and accessories? All right, Mr. LB, I'll circle back to you, but Flux. So if you're saying, my swing is, my arm plane is flat, right? Back, relative to the ground, somewhat flat, right? And you're saying I want more, tilt in my backswing, right? If you think about how our body works, in order to do that, you need to get this side lower, right? So if you want to increase the plane of your arms, you need more shoulder tilt, right? And what does that mean? So instead of, if my swing is flat like this, my arms and my shoulders work, relative to the ground pretty flat, right, around. And if you want them to go higher, you need more tilt, right? So that would mean my left shoulder goes down, right? And if my left shoulder goes down, my arms go up. So if I want super high arms, I would go really down with the shoulder, right? And vice versa. For flatter, it would be a turn, more laterally. So play around with that. But I would also tell you that, unless it's super, super flat, as long as you are, able to deliver the club consistently. I mean, there's tons of great players that had very flat swings, and there's great players with, steeper swings. So I would be, more concerned about your impact conditions and, am I striking the ball in the middle of the face than like aesthetically, I would love my swing to look nicer, right? They aren't always the same thing. They can be, right? I just want you to be careful about, chasing aesthetics in your swing that aren't always functional, right? We care much more about function than we do about form. All right, so Mr. LB, I want to start playing golf. I don't have loads of money. I love this question because it's something I feel pretty strongly about, right? That golf has an accessibility issue. It's very expensive. Greens fees are expensive. The equipment marketing is all over the place, right? You need new drivers every year. You got to, spend all this money to have the best clubs. It's just not true, guys. You can, if you're just learning golf and you want to get out and play, all you need is a few clubs, right? Go to the thrift store. Find a putter and a couple irons, maybe, a 6-iron and an 8-iron, and a wedge, a pitching wedge, a sand wedge. Grab your 5 clubs, get a couple balls, and go out and play. You don't need 14 clubs. You don't need brand new equipment. eBay is another great resource for used equipment. Again, I don't want you to feel like, oh, I don't have the brand new equipment, I can't even play. It's not true. I mean, I played really good golf with 15-year-old clubs. So I want you to feel empowered to get out there and say, I can have a great time. I can learn some skills. I can enjoy the outside, hanging out with my friends, playing golf with just a basic setup. I think some people might actually be better off, right? Instead of being like, well, is it 6 or 7 or, I could hit, whatever shot. If you're better off just hitting a one club solidly than hitting, one that you're unsure of unsolidly. So Mr. LB, I'm glad you asked that question because it's definitely something that golf needs to work on. And, hopefully my opinion, lends some credence to this idea of like, you don't need fancy equipment to go play good golf. And to get started, right? You can go to the range, and start building your skills with just a couple clubs. Adventure Brothers, hey Adventure Brothers, welcome to the stream. How do you hit longer irons? Like 3 to 6. Yeah, so this is something I've struggled with myself for a long time, and I think it's important to understand, as these clubs get flatter, right? They get, as they get longer, they get the lie angles get flatter, right? And the swing gets longer, and so if you have some steepness in your swing, like I often do, right? You can get away with that with a short iron. This is a pitching wedge, right? Because of how much more upright it is, as compared to the other, the 5-iron in my hand, right? It's a much lower, flatter angle. So, we should tailor our swing that way, right? And trying to, for me especially, feeling like with the longer irons, I'm making a very smooth swing with not a ton of arm travel, right? I'm trying to make sure that my swing is still pretty consistent, in terms of the arm path. And then it's, you're really trying to feel like you're sweeping it off the ground or, approaching it nice and shallow. And again, contact is so important, right? If you hit a 3-iron way off the heel or off the toe, or you hit it a little thin, you're going to really have a bad result. So the contact is so key. And I find just really trying to smooth it out can help a ton. Because again, contact is what we care about most. Fragile said hi. Hey, Fragile. Hey, Jin Young Jang. And Doggo. Hey, guys. So here, actually, Adventure Brothers, we'll grab the 3-iron, right? This is the old butter knife, the blade. And hit some with this, right? And again, I've found it feels almost like a 3/4 swing. But because of how long the club is, right? That short, arm swing even, the club is still, has a ways to travel, right? So you swing it up, and then we're trying to just sweep it off the turf almost. And I love this drill, grabbing an old blade, long iron for ball striking, right? I mean, it really forces you to feel like the swing is pretty dialed in to hit good shots with this club. So that can be a fun one just to keep in the bag, give yourself a way to practice. Austin said, why can some days my setup feels good and feels like I can turn through the ball so well, yet other days my setup looks so alien, like I'm aiming right looking down? Oh, I totally get this one. I struggle with my alignment too sometimes, and what I would tell you is, I tried to solve this problem with routine, right? So, doing a ton of practice, like with some alignment sticks, saying like, okay, this is, where I'm aimed, and this is where I need my feet to be pointed, right? Some amount, like a parallel, almost train track kind of idea, right? And then you just practice it to where everything is, you'll notice like in my videos and my swings, everything is pretty similar, right? I take one practice swing behind the ball, I step in, there's a couple looks, right? I hold the club up like this in front of me, and then I set it down and I make my swing, right? But I've done that enough times with enough repetition to say, like, okay, when I'm parallel to these, because we don't have, alignment rods on the golf course, right? And you can give yourself some checkpoints, right? Like for me, I like feeling like my left shoulder's pointed at like 11 o'clock, maybe 10:30, to feel like my club is pointed at the target, right? Because if you get 2 in here, then you're, closed, or vice versa, right? And so trying to, have some checkpoints, right? And do some practice, on this to train this skill, right? Setting up to the ball properly is a skill, independent of, making a good swing, right? You can make a great swing. If you're aimed 20 yards right of where you're intending to hit it, you're not going to hit it, on the green. Left shoulder at 10 o'clock might be genius, bro. Going to try that. Yeah, thanks. And again, these are just things that I picked up over the years. And so again, I mentioned routine, right? So, when I'm picking a target now, say I'm aimed, 2 yards right of the flag, right? And I pick out my line, and I look down, and I use my, the club as a straight edge to say, okay, there's like a dark spot or a light spot on the grass right in front of me, right? So instead of trying to aim my club at a target that's hundreds of yards away, Well, I can aim my club at that spot pretty effectively, right? And say, like, okay, if I hit the ball over that spot that's in line with my target, I should end up somewhere pretty close to where I want to. And I feel much more confident that I can aim, appropriately to a spot that's right there. I can set up square to that spot, and I can practice. You can even put a tee down on the range or a coin and just say, that's my intermediate target. I'm going to practice setting up to it, right? And what does that feel like? And so for me, that's where I got the, right? So I was trying to give myself some, like, how can I tell when I'm, for me, aim too far, too close, too far to the right? And it really wasn't, when I start feeling I'm looking over my left shoulder too much, I know I've overdone it. So when I'm nice and square, it's that, left shoulder is kind of pointed somewhere slightly left of target. I have my intermediate spot. I'm just going to try and hit it right over there. And you make the swing. So hopefully that helps, Austin. What's your biggest tip for stopping an outside-in swing? I used to be a bogey golfer, but stopped playing to compete in MMA, and my swing is destroyed. Well, welcome back, number one. Welcome back to the golf. So outside in, right? Probably giving you some trouble with the slice, maybe. So a couple things. You've already diagnosed what's happening, right? You know that the path is some amount to the left, right? And the face is open, that's causing the slice. So how do we correct that? Number one, I love this idea of fighting fire with fire. You guys have heard me talk about this a bunch, right? So if we know the path is too far to the left and we're slicing it, well, teach yourself to make a different swing that causes the ball to curve the other way, right? So, aim down your target line, but hit it to left field, right? Force yourself to hit some draws, see the ball curving right to left, and then notice, like, well, what does that feel like with the club face? My path has to shift some, right? Obviously. And so number one, start there. Try to produce, the opposite result. But then also, you can give yourself some physical barriers. So if your swing is outside in, you can put a head cover or something, over here, such that if your swing does get steep, right, you're going to hit it. You can't get to the ball with an outside in path if you put a barricade there. But I definitely can hit it if I come from the inside, right? So those are a couple ideas that come to mind, for the outside-in path, because it's very common, right? A lot of us, struggle with steepening the shaft on the way down. Hey, Tweeb is back. Just played my round in Turkey. Course was unbelievable. Thanks for the advice for my driver. Practiced on the range before and never sliced it once. Amazing. Oh, I'm so glad you came back to the stream, Tweeb, to tell us how it went. That's very cool. I feel very gratified that worked for you and that, you had a positive result after trying it. That's awesome to hear. Really awesome. Dennis says, at what point would you recommend players' irons over game improvement irons? 20 handicap right now, looking for new clubs. Great question. I am going the other way, right? I went from blades to a CB iron this year. I think forgiveness is fine, right? I think the more I understand about golf strategy, it's more about, how many greens can you hit, not how close can you hit it, or, can you curve the ball, to get it close to the hole. Which is not to say that you can't, buy new clubs if you want new clubs. I love getting new equipment. But I think just, having an understanding of what your objectives are is important. So for me, I knew that a more forgiving iron could help as I, still work on my swing a bunch and, don't always hit the center of the face. None of us do. So that was my thought process. I would also definitely suggest that you get fit. There's tons of great options for equipment out there. If you're going to invest in your game via equipment, which again, I think, lessons or practice time is often a better use of resources. But go to a club champion or, someplace you can hit on TrackMan and get fit and really have a sense of what the data says, find what's best for you. American kid, hit a punch-out shot. Yeah, so if you're hitting a punch-out shot, you're hit your ball in the trees. And let's say again, if you're hitting a punch-out shot, maybe you drove it in the trees if you were a pro golfer, right, 80% of the time you would make a bogey from there. So let's understand what our objective is when we're hitting a punch-out shot, right? All we're trying to do is get the ball back in play, away from the trouble, and then we're trying to play it as if that was our drive and we're making a par, right? So you chip it out, you hit it back to the fairway, you hit that on the green, you 2-putt for a bogey, and that is an awesome outcome. If you chip it out and you hit it on the green and 2-putt for bogey, you did really well, right? So, you know, that's the strategy. And then how do we actually do it, right? You know, say we got to hit it a little bit low. You know, the lie is okay, so we don't have to worry about that. But, you know, I would open my stance a tiny bit, maybe stand a tiny bit closer to it. And I have a 5-iron in my hand, right? So I'm imagining like a shot that goes maybe, you know, 50, 60, 70 yards in the air, back towards the fairway, right? You know, we got to keep it low because of the trees. And you're going to make a short, abbreviated backswing and follow through, right? And you're just going to stay nice and centered on top of it, hit down on the ball. And it's just that abbreviated, nice and compact swing. You know, we don't need a ton of distance or speed out of it. We just need it to go, you know, where we're aimed, back to the fairway. So I like that idea, you know, staying a little bit on top of it, closer to it. Blanker says, how far do you hit driver? Now we're in like the 290 carry area range. Fragile said, I'm still using my Callaway Rogues and an R15. That's awesome. What's your handicap? Right now it's about 1. What's your biggest tip for consistency? I'm the kind of golfer who can have 9 holes hitting it well, and the back 9 I'm all over the place. And then Bids thinks I need to loosen up my stance. We'll take that under consideration. To answer Obscurity's question, so for consistency, I struggle with this too, right? You know, it's important to remember that 18 holes of golf is a lot, right? It's a long, you know, a bunch of different shots all put together, and they're all independent events, right? You could play the first 9 holes amazing, and then get to the 10th hole and have it all fall apart, right? I've been there myself. And you're like, man, what happened, right? And you realize that, you know, those 9 holes have already happened. You've already, you know, written down those scores. Are you freaking out?
She tricked me.
Tricked you?
Yeah, she cried like she
Tricked you? She says, what's happening in here?
Yeah, she was crying like she
Oh, you like being a superstar on the stream? Yeah, the people love when you come say hi. Yeah, hi.
Okay, come on.
All right, we're almost done.
Sorry.
So yeah, like I said, just mentally remembering that, you know, these are independent events and shots, and trying to hit each one the best you can is really all you can do. You know, we've all hit great drives right down the middle, and you walk down there and it's in a divot. And you're like, man, you know, that shouldn't have happened. Or, you know, like I've been doing recently, you flare one right into the trees and it hits a branch and ends up back in the fairway, right? So you can hit good shots and get bad results and vice versa. But controlling what you can control, I think, is super important. And I struggle with it myself, right? I'm not very good at being like, man, you know, I whiffed that last shot. Like, let's not let it affect the next 3. That's something that I still am working on. So I think, again, just, you know, knowing that if your swing is good enough to play the first 9 holes well, it's still good enough to play the next 9. It's probably, you know, just more of a, you know, mentally staying focused and you know, controlling what you can control. But yeah, no, it's a great question. It's something I struggle with myself. PMT, baby. Yeah, that's right. I love PMT. I remember in 2015, listening to the first PMT episode, walking to work as an intern. And to now still be listening to those guys, and like they have kids, you know, I'm married and have dogs and stuff. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, the show's been really good for a long time, and there's, you know, a reason they've had so much success. The dog's so cute. Yeah, thanks. Tips on driving the ball straight with driver, and then Dexter had the same question. Need to fix my driver slice. Yeah, and then And Sawson's comment had a question about driver too, so let's do some driver stuff. So let's understand first, right? If we're slicing the ball, what's happening, right? It means our path, our club path for a right-handed player is some amount to the left, and the face is open, right? So we have this glancing blow, right? And that's going to cause the ball to spin a lot and go very short and to the right. If you think about if you ever played tennis or table tennis, ping pong, and you wanted to hit a drop shot, right? You open the face and really hit down on it, and you'd produce a super spinny shot, that doesn't go very far, and hopefully lands right over the net and where your opponent can't hit it. But in golf, that's not the shot that we're looking for, right? Unless you're, around the green or something. With a driver, we want to have, more of a forehand type of feel, right? Low to high, where we're launching the ball up into the air with not a lot of spin. And with the club face, square, such that the ball flies, pretty straight through the air, right? So if we understand what's happening, how do we go about correcting that? So 2 things. All of these technique stuff, I'm going to recommend that you do at slower speed, right? So don't say, like, okay, I'm going to stop slicing it, and I'm going to try to swing my driver at 100% speed and do both of those things simultaneously. I think you have to slow down to change your technique effectively, right? So if we know that we need to get the club face more closed and the path more neutral, right, more, from the inside or square, not cutting across it, like we mentioned a second ago, you can give yourself a physical barrier, right? Put a head cover down or a box of golf balls, something that's, outside of the ball, such that if you do swing steep and across it, right, you're going to hit that blocker, and that will help you train yourself to only, deliver the club from the inside, right? The other way that I actually like better as a task orientation, right, would be to say, well, I know that I can, if I aim, right down Main Street, down to center field, I'm going to produce a swing that slices some amount, right? The ball's going to end up going to the right. Force yourself, give yourself a task orientation to say, okay, I'm going to aim like I'm hitting it to center field, but I'm actually going to hit it down the left field line, right? Force yourself to see the ball turning right to left, right? And use your brain to change your swing and your body to build the skills to say, okay, if I need to hit it over there, I have to close the face and I can't swing it, from the outside, right? And that will, you might hit some big hooks, but when you're building these skills, that's totally fine. Don't be worried so much about where the ball is going. You're more concerned about building the awareness of where was the club face, where was my club path, right? And teaching yourself those skills such that you can produce either a draw or a fade, right? Yeah, Dexter, same exact thing. This is exactly what we're talking about. So this is the drill to not come over the top, right? You wouldn't really be able to hit like that big draw unless you were going to pull it. But yeah, so if you're swinging over the top, do this drill with the head cover, right? Because if you swing, if your swing is over the top, right, inside and steep, you can't get to the ball, right? So if that's your miss, you're going to hit the blocker. And vice versa, right? If your swing was too far from the inside, you could do the exact opposite, right? And try to train yourself, if you're overdoing it from the inside, you just adjust where you'd place the blocker. So hopefully that helps, Dexter. Can you, yeah, we talked about driver. Any tips on how to work on distance control 20 to 50 yards? So 20 to 50 yards, again, this is where, again, reps are going to be your friend. Get out there on the chipping green. I like practicing different yardages, right? So walk off, you can walk off a 20-yard shot and then, put down a towel or something, right? And say, okay, if I want to have a 20 yards in the air swing, what does that look like? And then, do it at 30 and 40 and 50 yards. And what you're trying to train yourself is, not only am I striking the ball solidly, so I can hit it my intended distance, but also to learn, like, if I have a 20-yard shot and I have a 30-yard shot, that, you're building the skill of, one of those being longer and further than the other, right? Because it's all the same swing. You're just scaling it up for how far you want the ball to go. So being able to consistently say, okay, if it's, if I have a 30-yard pitch and it's 10 yards on the green, so I maybe want to land it, around 20 yards or hit it 20 yards in the air, you have a feel or a shot you can go back to, right? How to square club face with driver. My miss is a block fade. So if you're blocking it and fading it, right? If the ball's starting right of your target line and then fading, that tells me that the club is probably coming from the inside, which is good, but that the face is definitely open when you when you're making impact, when you're hitting the ball. So what you have to do is train yourself to get some balls drawing, right? Get on the range and try and hit some massive hooks. Aim like to right center and try to hit it down the left field line, right? And just teach yourself to get that club face closing faster, right? And give yourself, some skills to such that, you can tell, right, if the face is open or closed and how to manipulate that. And then from there, you try to dial it in so that you're hitting, a pretty consistent flight that goes somewhat straight. But I think it's so important to build the skill set around club face awareness and path awareness. So if your face is consistently open and the ball's going to the right, you got to learn how to create the opposite result. Michigan man, do you like your net return? I do really like the net return. It definitely is, it's a premium price net, but the quality seems to hold up to the price. I could see myself having this for a really long time. It's well built. It does what it says it's going to do. I have somewhat limited space in here. So to only need, 3 feet behind this wall to not have to worry about balls ricocheting everywhere. One thing that I do need to work on is getting a better, hitting setup. But, something that's a little more forgiving, I think, right? I've noticed, in my hands, if I hit a bunch of balls, like it is somewhat jarring on the body. To hit, off even with some padding under here and a decent mat. But that's just a work in progress. So long-winded answer to say, yes, I've been a huge fan of it. And for me, to be able to just come out here and hit balls pretty much whenever I want has been the best part, right? Not like, oh, I got to get in the car, go to the range, give a guy $20 for hit a bunch of old crappy range balls. Ooh. Guys, if you haven't already subscribed, do me a favor, hit that button super quick. Makes a big difference for us on the channel. So we try to, do more of this stuff, grow the platform, bring you guys more, entertaining, fun stuff. Anybody catch the PGA Championship today? I thought there was a lot of good scores. My boy Max Homa with a 64 today. That was awesome. Gray says, I have a hard time getting my wrist to flex on the downswing, causing me to slice. Yeah, same thing I was just saying with Decode, right? I think, my number one best advice is just learn how to hit some draws. Give yourself a task orientation, force yourself to, let your brain take over and say, the goal is to hit it over there, right? It's going to feel really weird at first, like you're hitting, way to the left. But again, you're trying to build an awareness of the club and what happens, with your arms and hands to produce those shots, such that eventually, you could just stand on the range and say, draw or fade, and just hit one of those two shapes on command, right? Kevin Otto said hello from Pittsburgh. Hey, Kevin. I married a Pittsburgh girl, so I'm quite familiar with the area, and hopefully going to be out there at Oakmont this summer for the U.S. Open. What I've mostly been working on, guys, if you can't tell in my swing, is just this really fluid, almost syrupy kind of transition, right? Like I'm sending the club back and then letting it almost just hang there for a second before I start down, focusing on trying to sequence everything a little bit better, work on my balance. I really love the freezer drill for this, right? So that's where, you take it up, let it hang there for a second, almost like a double pump, and then make your swing. That's a really good one for sequencing and ball striking. Decode, have you gotten an apparel sponsor yet? No, not yet. Who do you think we should, what would be a cool sponsor for our channel? That's what's interesting, right? I mean, I don't look like a lot of golfers, but I play better than a lot of golfers. So I have no idea, and obviously that stuff will all happen in time. But it could be interesting, right? How some of these different brands think about, their marketing and what does today's golf audience care about? All right, guys, last thing, because I've been wanting to do this. Before we go, Decode, we're a brand from the UK. Oh, well, I'm a big fan of the UK. My wife and I go there all the time. Let's do a quick club twirl tutorial, because a lot of people have been asking about this, and we've got some good tips in the comment section, right? This is something that I never did until a few weeks ago, and then I was like, you know what? I think it looks pretty cool. I should just learn how to do it. So if I actually do ever hit a good golf shot, I could club twirl it out there and look like I really know what I'm doing. All right, so number one, Decode wants to sponsor the channel live on the stream, guys. You heard it here first. So I assume it's not usually how this happens, but I don't know anything about Decode. I like the name. It's pretty cool. I do like UK fashion. So I want to learn more before I accept, but it's very interesting that we could be, doing deals like this live on the stream. I like the passion you align with us. That's awesome. Great. I love the feedback. All right, so what was I saying? Club twirl tutorial, right? So you finish your swing, you just hit an absolutely, flushed 7-iron, right? You're holding your finish. You want to give it a little extra swag. Let everybody know you striped it. So you got to loosen up the left hand, right? Left hand's really the driver of the swing, but for this, got to loosen it up quick. And then, right, I have this overlap grip, but even if you're interlocking, right, you want to get these fingers spinning the club, right? So you can practice even just, like this, boom, just a little spin. Decode, I do not have an Instagram for this account, but my email, johnyounggolfs@gmail.com, is on the channel page. You can definitely reach me there, and I'll be pretty responsive. Yeah, johnyounggolfs@gmail.com, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, these fingers are what are going to spin the club, and you got to, again, so we're simultaneously loosening the left and then getting ready to spin, right? So I just hit it. I'm going to loosen up my grip and then spin and catch. Right? And the best way to practice is just, even with just the right hand, you know, give it some spins. Awesome. Decode is going to email us. Very cool. What are the best ways to hit your irons further? I feel the swing is good with the right line, but only 75% distance to where I want to hit it. So distance, again, is just the relationship between club head speed and how efficiently we transfer that into the ball, right? We call that smash factor in golf. So if you want the ball to go further, we can either improve the launch conditions, you know, improve the smash factor, right? That means hitting the center of the club face more, you know, more consistently, and really optimizing our launch and spin. Or we can increase our club head speed. And those are really the two avenues to increase our distance. If we want to improve our launch conditions, right, you'd make sure that you have a descending angle into the ball. You know, there's some amount of forward shaft lane at impact, right? But let's assume that if you're hitting it on line and you're hitting it solidly, then you're accomplishing those two things. So from there, it's just about going to be adding club head speed, right? And there's a bunch of ways you can do that. I am a big fan of the super speed, overspeed training regimen. And these are just weighted clubs that they send you. You know, there's a light, medium, and heavy. And there's a regimen that goes with them. And it's, you know, it's mostly geared towards driver, but, you know, club head speed is club head speed. So that's where I would start. O says, what's the difference between driver swing and iron swing? So great question. I struggle with this myself, you know, the transition between the iron swing and the driver swing. And what you're going to want to do is understand, you know, the iron swing needs a descending angle into the ball, right? You know, it sits on the ground. We have to strike it with the shaft leaning forward and hitting down into the turf, right? That, you know, because of the loft on the club, that propels it up into the ground and gives us that nice compression that we're looking for. And the opposite is true with the driver, right? We want to be hitting up on it, you know, such that if the ball is sitting up off the ground, we are, you know, hitting it up into the air, hopefully with not a lot of spin, right? So, you know, you could think about the driver swing as low to high, right? And the iron swing, you know, is more high to low, right? Where you're hitting down onto the ball. So hopefully that helps answer your question, O. All right, guys, just past the top of the hour here. We'll probably hit for about 5 more minutes. Like I said, super grateful for all the support on the channel. I mean, the amount of growth has been unbelievable. You know, apparently we have apparel companies, you know, showing up in the live stream to be like, hey, this is, you know, the kind of guy we want representing us, which is sweet. So we'll learn more about that. Got a ton of good questions, a lot of good engagement, you know, a bunch of new subscribers. You know, makes it so much easier to, you know, come out here and do this and practice when you know there's a supportive community behind you. And so yeah, we're gonna keep doing this. We're gonna keep streaming. We're gonna keep, you know, posting videos. BDR says, can you do a slow version of a 6-iron? Yeah, sure. So I just grabbed my 6-iron. And so for these clubs, right, most of the irons I play, you know, pretty much right in the center of my stance. Trying to, you know, stay pretty balanced and not shifting off the ball all that much, right? So my feel recently has been to keeping the club head, you know, a little bit further outside on the way back. And so if I were to do it in slow motion, right, it would look something like this. Right, so the club head stays out. I start shifting, and you're in business. Can you do a demonstration of getting your arms and hips at the same time so I'm not hooking it like slow motion? Yeah, great question. So if you're hooking it, right, as a right-handed player, we know that the face is some amount too shut and our path is maybe too much from the inside, right? So we're producing this kind of, big right to left spinning shot. And I think what you're getting at maybe is just being a little bit stuck, right? And maybe flipping it so the club face starts pointing left, right? And so I found it helpful to try and, learn this move independently of the golf swing, right? So the separation of your upper and lower body. And a great way to practice that is, you can walk just down the hallway, somewhere you can take a few steps and walk in a straight line while practicing that separation, right? Because you'll notice to keep your hips square and to keep walking in a straight line, right, you have to, allow your upper and lower body to separate. And it's the same thing that we're looking for in the golf swing, where because of the sequencing, right, my lower body is moving this way while my upper body is still, finishing the backswing or staying square, right? So you end up with, you need a fair amount of separation in the movement of your lower body compared to your upper body. And if you think about everything, reaction and reverse reaction, right? If we want the club and the ball going out that way, well, our body has to be moving some amount away, right? So when you do it in slow motion, right, you're trying to, maintain that separation into impact. So there's a couple of ones that could help. All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for today's stream. But like I said, if you want to subscribe, you want to follow along for more, I'm super grateful. Thank you guys for being here, checking out what we're doing. Hopefully you guys learned some stuff. And we'll see you next time. We're going to do more of this, so we'll talk to you later.